And I'll call the meeting to order, but before I do, I will also suggest that we continue with digital meetings. And if members of the public are listening or watching, if you'd like to make any comments, please email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us. And we're doing this by virtue of the peacetime emergency, and that is Minnesota Statutes Section 13D.021, if you're interested in looking that up. And we'll start by seeing if we have a quorum by doing a roll call. And I think, is that Bridget doing that?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson. Barber.
Here.
Chambliss. Chambliss. Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Luce.
Here.
Turner.
Here.
Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Zarin. Zarin. Cherzelli.
I'm here. And also note that Councilmember Chambliss is here and notified us such in the chat. I think we have a quorum, so which brings us to the agenda, and we have one major information item. So we're looking forward to hearing an update on our climate action plan. But first, the minutes, which were sent out in advance from the April 7th, 2021 regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Sterner. I'd motion to approval.
Okay, Councilmember Sterner, thank you. And Councilmember Johnson, second. Thank you.
Yes. Thank
Any corrections? All right, hearing none. Bridget, you can call that roll.
All right. Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson. Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Luce.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Zarin. Zarin. Cherzelli.
Aye. So the minutes are approved. So we have our one information item, but I just wanted to acknowledge first what a big day it was yesterday, or it is today in Minnesota, in issues we so deeply care about and have a role in. And I just have to kind of acknowledge everybody who has kind of been watching and thinking about our state and our communities and our world with attention toward Black lives. And I was been in various meetings today, and to think maybe I slept better last night. Well, actually, I didn't, because I think the whole thing is swirling around for us to take our serious role. So although we're here today talking about climate, we can think about climate impacts toward a broader world. And it always, I keep saying this, it's humbling to know that we actually are in policy positions to make a difference. Having said that, I've really been looking forward talking to Lisa Eberhaus about this, bringing the whole kind of context of our agency-wide climate work, and it is one of our 4 major initiatives. I sit on the subcabinet for climate, and I've been looking forward to the briefing, which I've gotten in this area and that area, but it's kind of nice to get it holistically and have us kind of understand it and answer questions. And I know it's always a work in process, so I'm really thrilled that we, on the eve of Earth Day, that we have Eric Wizchik. Is that Wizchik? Am I pronounced that correctly? Probably not.
It's a Y check.
Why?
Don't worry about it.
Why would I?
Not a lot of vowels.
Why would I pronounce it any other way? Okay, now I've got it. Sarah Smith, I can pronounce that, and Jeff Freeman. So I don't know, Eric, are you leading off, or maybe Lisa? You're going to give us a little context.
I think Lisa's going to lead us off.
I'll kick you
Absolutely,
off.
she should. All right, welcome.
Yeah. Greg, could you bring up the presentation for us, please? Thank you, everybody. I'm Lisa Barajas, for the record, Community Development Director, and I'm the executive sponsor for our climate work at the Council and have been for several years. And I just wanted to give a quick overview, and Chair Zelli aptly summarized it much more briefly than I will in the next couple of slides, but just to ground our conversation today in the direction that we've been given as staff. So next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about those foundations, and I'll kick off our conversation today on that, and then turn it over to the team to discuss the project purpose and get down into some details there. Climate change in Minnesota in key terms, just as a refresher for everybody. On how we shape and frame our work in Minnesota as compared to, say, a coastal city that might be facing different climate impacts. We'll talk about our approach to this project and our timeline for the work, and then talk about some work that is currently underway, including onboarding of a consultant, and then have a facilitated discussion with you at the end of our conversation to really help guide our work going forward. We're really at the beginning of this work, I should say, in this plan, but have been at this work in climate action amongst our divisions for many, many years now. So this is our effort to really pull all of that together. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as Chair Zelli had said, as one of the council's 4 priorities, sustainability is right there. On the left-hand side, with the intent of building a resilient region that mitigates its adverse contribution to climate change. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, the 3 objectives that go along with the sustainability priority. And the green one is the one that we'll really be focusing on today, is that creation of an agency-wide sustainability plan that will streamline, accelerate, and coordinate all of the council's work in this area, and really going to those 2 objectives in the above of collaborating across the region to address climate change mitigation and adaptation, and accelerating the council's contributions, or accelerating the reduction of the council's contributions to climate change through that greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Under that operations objective of creating an agency-wide sustainability plan, as part of that strategic plan, the council included these strategies that are on the right-hand side of the slide, which we've really been using as our guideposts for how we begin to develop the climate action plan for the council, really focusing on developing those targets and goals as it's noted in that first line for our operations, so our wastewater operations, our transit, and all of the buildings that we own, including our housing operations and some of our other areas where we are have emissions that are related to our work. And then the second strategy there being really focused on supporting our future regional planning efforts, as we've already had conversations with you over the last several months about starting to turn into that next chapter of preparing our 2050 regional development guide. We have already over the last several years been doing a lot of research as it relates to our own work, but also researching and analyzing the current state of flood risk and mitigation in the region, of climate impacts that we're seeing today, and even how communities are addressing climate change within their 2040 comprehensive plans and how that may be distributed around the region or not. And so really using that information to help provide future direction to how we pull that work into our 2050 regional planning efforts. That third strategy is really looking at adaptation specifically, where that first strategy is focused on emissions reduction. We are seeing climate impacts today on the ground, as you all are well aware, with the amount of inland flooding that we see with snow in April, with different things that aren't the norm that maybe you might have seen 20 or 30 years ago in this region. And that has real impacts on our infrastructure, real impacts on our operations day to day, and really should influence how we plan and guide growth in this region going forward. Because it's not just us that are facing those and experiencing those impacts, but city staff, county staff from around the region have noted to us as well how they're also experiencing that. The fifth and sixth strategies here are really around, the fifth strategy really focusing on the council's role in supporting and addressing air and water quality standards in the region. And the fifth role of really highlighting the importance of regional parks and open space as part of and one of the major tools that we have in our toolbox that can contribute to a more resilient region. That open space system is not just a jewel for the recreation and nature-based aspects that it provides to our region, but also in its role to contribute to carbon sequestration and water management around the entire region. Next slide, please. So here I'd like to turn it over to the team to start talking about more of the details in the climate plan. So I think Eric is up next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Lisa?
Yep.
Great. So I'm Eric Wycheck. I work as a planning analyst in local planning assistance within community development. I am one of three project managers on this project. Along with me here is Sarah Smith from Environmental Services and Jeff Freeman from Metro Transit. And Lisa Barajas is the project sponsor for the Climate Action Plan. So um, the nice thing about this project is that it is truly interdivisional. We've chartered a team within the last year, and I think our team is comprised of about 10 individuals across the council, really truly representative of all divisions of the council. And I would say also that the team is very enthusiastic and really integral to the success of this project. On the left-hand part of this slide, I just wanted to give you the high-level pitch of what the project is. So the Climate Action Plan will unify our efforts across the council to reduce our climate impacts and prepare for a changing climate. It will define strategies that will strengthen our ability to plan and deliver services to the region through leadership, collaboration, and stewardship. And you might ask yourselves, well, why a climate action plan? Why now? We've been doing climate work for a while now. And I would say, we've been doing environmental work for a very, very long time at the council, really since the council's inception. But the climate specific work really started to pick up after the adoption of Thrive. So around 2015, we really started doing a lot more climate specific project work. Now, one of our challenges has been that while those projects are really important and they've yielded some really great results in terms of understanding where our vulnerabilities might be or addressing and calculating our GHG emissions, things like that. One of our problems is that the projects are standalone projects. What the Climate Action Plan will do essentially is to unify that work under a single coordinated framework, which will really push us forward and help us with the climate work in the future. So we're going to be recognizing the current work that's being done, but the Climate Action Plan will also commit to future actions on climate. And all council divisions, like I said, are involved. The time frame on this, we're looking at 3 to 5 years from the point of adoption to renewal of the plan. And the reason for that rather tight turnaround is we really want to be able to revisit the climate action plan on a regular basis to evaluate how we're doing on our various commitments. Next slide, please. So tying the climate action plan back to Thrive, many of you are familiar with the Thrive outcomes. I mean, I think the climate action plan probably fits within all of these. Pardon me, I'm just going to move my dog because he's going to bark, I think. I might just hold him for a little bit, if you don't mind. So we've got the 5 outcomes here from Thrive. Sustainability and equity being really major components of the climate action plan, along with, I would say, stewardship as well. One thing I wanted to emphasize on this climate action plan is that it is not going to be a regional climate action plan. It is an internally focused, more operational plan. And the reason for that is that we've done our best work through Thrive, really, and through the policy plans. We've done our best work when we get our own house in order, when we lead by example. So by creating our own climate action plan, which is more internally focused, we'll be able to lead in the region going forward. As you can see here, the equity piece will include an environmental justice component. We are working on scoping that out and figuring that out at the moment, but that will be part of the climate action plan and part of future work going forward in the council. Next slide, please. So climate change in Minnesota. I know many of you have seen this slide before, but I'm just going to revisit this quickly. The climatologist at the U of M often talk to us about the difference between our variable Minnesota climate, which we're very used to, and long-term trends. So while we do see extreme weather shifts in Minnesota between the seasons, there's a difference between that variability and these long-term trends. And the long-term trends that we're seeing are these warming winters and extreme rainfall. And though we have not experienced it yet, the climatologists tell us that we should be seeing some upward shift in trending heat waves as well within the next few years. Now, the warming winters, obviously, they have an impact on things like water quality. They also have an impact on things like bringing in or keeping around invasive species. Things like emerald ash borer, which affects our tree canopy. Also, the freeze-thaw cycle is obviously affected with warming winters as we hover near that freeze point. So that can have a really big impact on our infrastructure. The extreme rainfall, we've seen a lot of issues around localized flooding, especially when we look at our transit systems and things like that. How do we reroute when this is occurring? How do we try to anticipate where localized flooding might occur? These are some of the things that we need to start thinking about when we do our planning. And the climate action plan will address some of these pieces. Next slide, please. This terminology will be familiar to a lot of you. The mitigation is really reducing our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions through efficiency, through lighting retrofits, making sure our facilities are operating effectively. Adaptation is really recognizing that we are experiencing some climate impacts now, and how do we adapt to those? How do we change our policies and practices to make sure that we are that our infrastructure and our responsibilities aren't overly affected by, for instance, extreme rain? That could be resizing stormwater infrastructure. It could be replacing turf grass with prairie to make sure that that water is dealt with. And then we have the resilience piece, which is a little bit harder to define. It's, I like to think of it as more of an outcome related definition. It's much wider than the mitigation and adaptation piece. And it touches on things like social cohesion. So when we have these climate impacts, is our community able to thrive in spite of these climate impacts? Can we actually move on and make sure that everything is in working order? even though we're experiencing some of these changes? And can we adapt as an organization quickly in changing conditions? Next slide, please. Now I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Smith to talk a little bit about the project timeline and some of what we've accomplished to date.
Great, thanks, Eric. As Eric mentioned, I am Sarah Smith from Environmental Services. I'm a sustainability manager within that division. And what you have before you is a high-level project timeline for taking us from earlier this year to completion of or adoption of the climate action plan that Eric has just been describing. We are hoping that by Q2 of 2022, we're ready to implement the plan. Now, implementing the plan is going to come with its own challenges and plans and timelines, and that will be determined and communicated much later in the process of all this work that we're doing today. Right now, we're really just focused on the development of the plan. Right now, you can see that we're kind of between Q1 and Q2 of identifying current work and analyzing gaps. We're well on our way. There's just a lot of work to do in capturing the current state. And if you could go to the next slide, I'll explain how we've been capturing the current state and why it might be taking us longer than we had anticipated. Thank you. So we thought about different approaches to finding out and making sure that we understood as a team what we currently do in the way of climate action throughout the council. What do we do for mitigation? What do we do for adaptation? What are we doing for resiliency? We know, as Eric pointed out, that we do a lot of work environmentally. We also know that many of the work that we do to protect the environment has implications and or benefits for the climate or for mitigating for future climate change. We wanted to make sure that before we head off on a journey to define a strategy and a direction that we should go as a council internally, that we had a good understanding of what we're already doing and what we're already thinking about in the way of climate change. So we can really take us to the next level or next chapter of our story as it pertains to climate change. So the approach we decided to take were interviews, in-person, virtual interviews. We as a team interviewed more than 36 work groups throughout the council. We had more than 200 staff in these interviews. We felt like while we did not talk to every staff member throughout the council, that we had a wide variety of dialogues that allowed us to get a good representation of all the work that is being done related to climate change throughout the council. We had individuals who supported each other in different divisions interviewing each other. We had multiple people in those interviews so that we could ask the questions, engage in the dialogue, and capture what we heard. We also, after taking those notes in those meetings, reflected those meeting notes back to those that we interviewed before integrating them into our master list of notes and current state information. We really wanted to make sure that we were capturing what they were telling us as staff in the work that they do. This work lays not only the foundation for where we're going to grow and go beyond with our climate action plan, it also was an opportunity for us to inform and engage staff throughout the council on what this work is, the importance of this work, why we're doing this now, what they can expect to see in the way of engagement as we go forward. This first interview round was just the first step in our engagement process. We have every intention of going back out to staff throughout the council to engage them in what ultimately ends up in the climate action plan itself. It is also going to provide us a foundation for educating and bringing on a consultant, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, to help us develop this climate action plan. I want to be clear that the climate action plan is ours, it is the council's, and we will develop it. The consultant is being brought on as a resource to us as staff to help develop the best plan that we can, bringing with them their expertise and experiences from working with other clients. In the next 3 slides, I'm going to give you we're going to give you a high-level overview of what you can expect to hear about from the current state interviews. We're going to talk about mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. In each of those buckets, we only refer to one division just to be concise in this presentation. And so it is not meant to be fully inclusive, but to be representative of the work that we do across the council. I will start with mitigation in our work in environmental services. A majority of our contributions to greenhouse gas emissions is through our energy purchases, our fossil fuel-based energy purchases, specifically around electricity purchases. So what do we do in the way of reducing our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions? Well, we look at our energy use in particular. We look for opportunities, plan for opportunities, and execute opportunities where we use less fossil fuel through being more efficient or conserving the energy. We look for opportunities where we can reuse or we can recover energy from wasted heat that might otherwise just be vented or flared if it is a gas. We convert that into electricity so that we are able to, again, purchase less fossil fuel-based energy. And then we, of course, also look for opportunities and have taken advantage of many opportunities to support the advancement and purchases for the Council of renewable energy. All of those things help us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel-based energy. In the way of, and that's in the operation, through the operations lens. If I also look at from a regional partnership with our stakeholders and customers throughout the region, we also provide tools and opportunities to help them advance their goals, toward their goals of mitigating for climate change. One of the really great example was a few years ago now, the local government community solar collaborative, which is where 30 or so local governments, including ourselves, came together through a joint RFP process to identify and take advantage of opportunities to be subscribers to community solar gardens throughout the metropolitan area. We've also worked very closely with Xcel Energy in many different ways, but one way that we have done in the last few years is to use to our advantage and the things that we have in common and what we want to advance. And so for the green partnership with Xcel Energy, we came to an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, that we would work aggressively together, the Council and Xcel Energy, to identify and take advantage of opportunities to bring 100% of the Council's electricity purchases from Xcel Energy to be from renewable energy sources. This is something that we are working on with them on an ongoing basis to make sure that it is something that meets not only the desired goal and result of purchasing of renewable energy and advancing renewable energy, but is also cost effective and meets our financial criteria as well as Xcel's financial criteria for being a successful project. This green partnership also includes our partnership with them in advancing our e-bus initiatives and working on how to work together to share in the costs and the development and execution of that program. Next, Jeff will talk about transit and adaptation. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon. I am Jeff Freeman. I'm a senior project coordinator in engineering and facilities. For, I'd say, greater part of the last decade, I've been working on various energy projects and looking to improve our energy efficiency through lighting retrofits and HVAC upgrades and building automation controls. And as we had, from those projects, we've learned a lot about the various things that the various consumers of electricity and energy within our facilities. Recently, we've embarked on a handful of new buildings, blue line, green line facilities that are in design. The new Minneapolis bus garage, and this facility that's shown on the slide, the Minneapolis Police Headquarters. This design and construction of new facilities has afforded us an opportunity to collaborate with our utility providers and our end users to design and build more energy efficient facilities that provide great spaces for our folks to work in. The MTP headquarters shown uses approximately half of the energy on a per square foot basis as the Haywood office building that sits right next door. And the other picture on this slide, we can understand the value of some of the previous council work, such as the climate vulnerability assessment, and how it can be a tool when we look to better plan our work. And we know as we collaborate more frequently across divisions, we will anticipate more tools that we will either work on together or work with outside consultants to develop, where we'll be able to aid each other across divisions to get our work done in better and enhance our operations. Now Eric will talk about resiliency. Thank you. Next slide.
Next slide. Thank you. Great. So, I did mention that resilience is often thought of as an outcome, but we can also frame it up as a strategy as well. And I think, again, resilience is a little bit more difficult for people to wrap their heads around in terms of what it really means. But when we think about a good example of resilience is if we think about doing something unilaterally on climate, um, if we're going to mitigate or adapt as an organization, that's all really important. But we're going to have a lot more impact on our region if we're partnering. So when we partner with other stakeholders that might have authority in certain areas that we don't, might have levers of authority where they can do more on climate, where we can't. This is where resilience can really be built, is through these partnerships. So community development has been really key in partnering, for instance, with local academic institutions. So one way of building resilience is to train up the next cohort of leaders in this area, the next cohort of professionals that are going to be working in this space. So by working with students on projects related to council operations and council planning, we're actually giving students a real life experience before they actually go off into the workforce. So that's been really critical in training up our next leaders. We've also been working very closely with communities on their solar planning, as some of the council members are aware of, through SoulSmart. The Met Council is also a member of the SoulSmart initiative as well. But providing technical assistance to local governments has been absolutely critical in building resilience in our region. And you can't really say enough about working with communities in partnership, making sure tools are available, but also making sure that they are connected to one another so that those best practices can be shared across the region. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it back over to Sarah for this part. Thanks.
Actually, I think I'm up on this
Are
slide.
you up on this one? Sorry.
I am. That's okay. As we see on the look at the slide here, we can see some of the what we were looking to put together when we went out for our RFP with our consultants. We spent a lot of time in developing the RFP. We recognize that our work was critical, that we were one of a kind as the way the council's formulated the model area we cover, unlike other agencies that have gone out for climate action plans in the past. We incorporate a number of different services and are a lot broader than whether it's just a straight wastewater treatment agency or a transit agency, as we represent the MPL and MTS and community development. So when we went out for this RFP, we constructed in a manner where we could identify a consultant, as Sarah had mentioned earlier, who could really partner with us. We weren't looking for a consultant that would review previous plans they've done in the past and tell us, oh, here's some good things they're doing here. Here's some things they're doing there. You could do them in the Twin Cities and you'll have a good plan for your council. We intend to work together. We intend to develop a plan together. Again, it will be our plan that they are supporting us in the development. So with that, we expect that we will have this consultant on board May of 2021, actually in a few weeks here. We're in the final home stretch on procurement, and our goal would be then to get to that second quarter 2021 completion, where we would be looking to come back and get a formal adoption of the plan from the council to start the implementation. Next slide, please. So how to find out more information? We have engaged with the comms groups within transit, within regional administration, with ES. We've made those folks integral members of our team. I think it was one of our early successful moves that we made. They've provided a lot of great insight in not only what words we choose and how we say them, but it also gives us some reflection on people who don't work in this area day in and day out. We would suggest the easiest way to stay in the loop on this project is to talk to the project team members, Lisa, Sarah, myself, Eric. There are information on the MetNet Council MetNet page where we have a page, and there are other team members from the various divisions listed there. With our comms folks, we are working on an internal communication program where we're consistently putting out information and updating folks on how this is moving along. And finally, we'll be participating in future informational gathering sessions, probably some facilitated discussion and maybe even some interviews to talk about some of the things that you guys find important as it relates to the climate action and the work we're doing. And I think we're passing it back to Eric.
Next slide, please. All right, now we're coming up to the exciting part of the presentation. We're going to have time at the end for questions, so we can come back to the three of us if you guys have specific questions about the project itself. But I wanted to ask Lisa to join us. Myself and Lisa are going to lead you all in a facilitated discussion. We really only have 2 questions for you, but we want, you come from such diverse backgrounds in terms of your professional experience, and you have this important policy-making role as well. So I think we saw this as a really good opportunity to draw from your experience, your collective experience as council members, but also as as professionals as well. So we really have these 2 questions that we would love to hear from you all. And the way Lisa and I are going to do this is we've got the questions here, but if you start talking, we might want to tease more detail out. So we might have some follow-ups for particular council members if people are okay with that. One thing I will say in this guided portion of the committee of the whole is that we want to kind of keep this a little bit high level in terms of like what goes in and out of the plan or what kind of targets we're setting. We're not quite there yet. We're going to most likely be returning to you all to help us engage on some of those topics. So this is fairly high level at this point. And I don't know, Lisa, do you have anything else to add to this before we launch into it?
No, I totally agree, Eric, and just that we're at the beginning of this conversation, so we want to hear from you as we really start to dive deep into this work.
Great, so we can go to the next slide. Like I said, we only have really 2 questions for you all. But this is kind of an open question. I would love to hear from the council members in terms of how you would best like to be informed and engaged on this project. I don't know if people just want to speak up, that would be fine. That works for us, I think.
Yeah, I encourage anybody to just speak out.
Chair Zelli and Eric, this is Sue Vento. I think the chair's daily report might be a good way to do it. We all receive it, and it's an easy thing to put information into. I think it would also be good to hear about it as it relates to specific committees, whether it be community development, transportation, environmental services. And the other piece related to this, but this isn't directly about how we're informed, but I'd be interested in kind of a summary of the staff comments that you got from the staff you interviewed. I would find that really helpful as a council member. I think I'd learn a lot from it, and it would help plant some seeds that might make me a better policymaker. So I'd appreciate that.
Do you mind if I just address that point, Councilmember Vento, that last point? Our aim was actually to have some of those summaries ready for you for this meeting today, but we're just not quite there yet. So I think it's going to be really interesting for you all to see what we're hearing from staff. Honestly, as staff, as project managers on this project, we've been really surprised by 2 things. The first thing is the level of enthusiasm for this project across the work units, across the entire council is very, very high. And I don't think we were entirely expecting that. And then the other piece of this is that people are connecting their work to climate change in ways that we had never anticipated. Everything from down to like how we transmit our agendas electronically as opposed to on paper. And I mean, it's just running the whole kind of the whole breadth and depth of what the council does. That's super exciting.
And Eric, I'm really,
Thanks for that.
that gets me, and I think some of my colleagues, I can tell by some of the expressions I'm seeing, that's exciting. And that's where we really can learn a lot. Because there's a lot of that nitty gritty that we don't necessarily see. So thank you. That's excellent.
Go ahead, Councilmember Fedson. Oh, I'm sorry, Lindstrom. Sorry, I need glasses.
That's all right, Mr. Chair. Boy, I'm super excited about this. And I love everything that I've been hearing over the last 45 minutes. And I would second everything that Councilmember Vento said. One idea about keeping informed, and I'm sort of hesitant to even mention this, but just for you folks to think about, the last council meeting, we approved, I think it's 3 work groups. We have a transit policy work group, we have a BIPOC work group, we have a housing work group. And think about what would it be helpful if there was a sustainability or a climate work group. Either now as we're putting the plan together to help bounce ideas off this work group, or to help implement it a year from now, or both. I know I would love to serve on such a work group, and I suspect I could wrangle a few of my fellow council members in that work group as well. But I don't want to create more work. I don't want to just have you create yet another presentation to another group. So I don't want that to be a barrier, but maybe it could be helpful. Again, either now or a year from now.
Yeah, Councilmember Sterner, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I was just going to kind of concur with Councilmember Vento and Lindstrom. That's what I was going to say, the work group. I just think that's a place that's missing, and I think we could really be valued added with that. Another way to get information, but I liked both of your comments on how to inform us on council activities, because I feel like sometimes the actions are taken without this, and I feel this is as important as any equity that we talk about. All of our Thrive, this is a key component of Thrive, and I feel like it's after the fact sometimes by the time we get it on certain areas. So I would love the working group and the ways that the Councilmember Vento talked about. I agree with all those.
Councilmember Johns.
And I agree with the idea about the working group.
Oh, Linnea, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, I think that I'm sorry. That's better. Hopefully you can read what I'm saying, because I'm seeing it written on the screen. I'm just saying I agree with the work group idea, and that it does feel to me like a missing piece, and perhaps there's a thread between some of the work of the environmental committee, MPOSC, and the equity work.
Particularly with climate justice. Judy, go ahead.
So I'm going to ditto what everybody has said. And I think those work groups give people who aren't on the traditional committees an opportunity to kind of hop in and, kind of get involved in a way that's not maybe as formal as the full committee work. So I really support that. And I agree with you, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. I think that it'd be great if it could, intersect with EAC, and I serve on the transit policy work group and the housing policy work group. And, if there's work that spills over into those areas, of course, whatever we can be doing to be broad reaching. And last but not least, I just want to again thank Councilmember Lindstrom for being such a fierce leader and expert in this area, because I am not. I know my strengths and my weaknesses, but I am always willing to follow a good leader. So thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts at this point?
May I offer that I appreciate the comments both on how to be informed and engaged. I think we spoke a lot about being informed. I think being engaged really goes to the work group item. But if there are other items that maybe are a lower commitment or broader reaching than the work group that other council members might be interested in and how to be engaged in that as well, I would offer that for your consideration. I don't know what those ideas might be, but I would ask you to kind of percolate on that.
Sue.
I would suggest that we think about possibilities for workshops or seminars where staff and council members can learn more about this issue. I think it's the old school teacher in me that is just always interested in where and what can we learn and from whom. And I'm guessing that Councilmember Lindstrom's got some great ideas on that.
I'm not Councilmember Lindstrom, but I wanted to say that education is a really important part of prepping anybody for making decisions, of course. And this is an area where we need a lot of education. I'd also say partnering with other agencies to find out, either locally or nationally or internationally for that matter, to find out how they're solving some of the issues and how and one area I'd like to see a little, I don't want to get in the weeds, but more strength is in our proactive changes, not just mitigation, not just resiliency, but what are things that we can be doing to compound positive impacts in the right direction. So looking across all of our organizational practices, from where we build buildings to how we build bus stops, and where can we add more carbon reducing planting and practices to aid in water retention, all of those kinds of things.
You know, these are great comments, and I was thinking that there's two kind of focuses. One, internal, what are we doing across, as Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen says, what are the various things we're doing in our own footprint? But then one of the great and less understood strengths of the Met Council is that we are the provider of tools, research, and we're the partners that actually are implemented by cities and towns, right, mostly. And Hennepin County in the paper today has their own climate action plan, but most cities and towns, less than Minneapolis, and need our help. So maybe council members, we can be, in a way, ambassadors for those city councils, those areas where we're interacting, to kind of help bring the word, or I hate to say the word sell, but I'm from the private sector, to help kind of inoculate the idea that this is a real valuable opportunity for our community. And that's the way we can kind of move the regional dial, is not just the things we do ourselves, but the things we help facilitate that are at a larger scale. So,
Well, Mr.
and
Chair, that raises, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
no. I'm just saying that's one of what we can be engaged with as council members.
I think
Go
that
ahead.
raises a great point, and we may even have some cities and counties who are ahead of us on this. And it gets back to
Sure.
what Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen was saying about finding out what other agencies and partnerships are doing already. So yeah, I like that.
Mr. Chair and council members, the learning from our partners, I know we do engage a lot with our local government partners, the Hennepin County Climate Action Plan being one that we listened in and followed along with, engaged with them along the way on that as well. And learn from one another is what we often also do. How did you make that work? How did that actually work in practice? Or what obstacles did you find or internally? Or this looks like it's working for you. We often have those types of conversations, which are really helpful. But part of this work isn't just learning from our partners in the region, but also learning from others and other agencies that are like us in other parts of the country and other parts of the world that might have similar responsibilities and similar climates, similar climate impacts, and figuring out how have they solved that. So certainly that will be part of our work here is, and part of the reason we bring in consultants is to bring in that outside perspective of what have you learned that can help inform how we learn things and what else where do we have blind spots or areas that we haven't investigated yet. So we're definitely looking forward to learning more and sharing that with you all as well. Are there other thoughts folks have around how to be more informed or more engaged on this project as we progress along?
I was just going to chime in and say we were talking about the educational components a minute ago, and I remember, Eric, you attended an international conference maybe a couple of years ago now, year and a half ago, and when you came back, you shared what you learned primarily to council staff, but I snuck my way in there as well. And I remember it well. It was pre-COVID because there was about 1,000 people showed up in a conference room. It was overflowing literally into the hallway to hear what you and other attendees of that conference had to say. And that's just an example of one thing that we could keep doing. And then on Charlie, on your point about learning from others, I'm reminded that we had an optional resiliency chapter for comp plans for 2040. And Lisa, do you know off the top of your head how many either adopted a complete chapter, resiliency chapter, or incorporated resiliency throughout their comp plan? I'm guessing it's a few dozen at least. Adopted resiliency, which would be up from 0 in the previous comp plan. So, and how many are now Soul Smart communities that we helped? I'm sure that's a few dozen as well. And how many expressed interest in having their own climate action plan and their own clean energy plan, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't have those like right off the top of my head. They used to. Those are the types of things that used to be here, but I've heard just kind of go away as you get older. But we do have that initial information pulled, and you might recall when Angela and Mike were here to talk to you about that comprehensive plan composite, and we had just a couple of initial preliminary findings on climate as it showed up in our 2040 plans, which you're right, Councilmember Lindstrom, is a stark difference from what we had seen in the 2030 plans, which was nearly silent, maybe kind of dabbling around the edges, especially outside of our central cities. So, but I know Eric looked at those really specifically and might have a little more detail on the tip of his tongue than I do.
Well, I think to Councilmember Lindstrom's point, we are tracking those, so we didn't do that before. When I first started at the council, somebody said to me, find out what communities are doing on sustainability. And I didn't know who to ask because we didn't have any mechanism for tracking at that point. But now we do, and we know what communities have committed to what, which is super, super helpful on a few fronts. It's helpful for us in terms of providing technical assistance and connecting communities to one another. But it also helps us because, I know that Councilmember Lindstrom knows this because, the council, the Metropolitan Council as an organization, we have operational components, we have facilities. We can actually learn from cities because it's just a scaling up process. I mean, cities have been doing this for a long time too, so they can learn from us, but we can they can learn from us, but we can also learn from them just as easily. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from talking to communities about what is the best way to do that, and how could we maybe implement that at our organization. So it's not just about, it's not a one-way street, you know. So thanks.
Well, Lisa, you get what you asked for, a lot of ideas. So
It's great. You saw us taking lots of notes. I think we just have one more question that we like to close with you today.
And I don't know if can Greg Ritchie bring that up again? Potentially the presentation?
Or I could just ask it, I suppose.
Yeah, we could ask it. This question is a really exciting one, I think.
So really would like to hear from you what as council members who, from your direction, we're looking for what a successful climate action plan for the council looks like, both in the short term and in the long term.
So again, I would ask you not to think of this just in terms of your council member or policy maker role, but think about your own professional life. If you've worked in any sort of organization, or if you've done work on transformational change, any of those lessons would be helpful here, I think, for us. So if you can draw on that, that'd be great.
Mr. Chair.
I would. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was just real quickly, I was just going to say, I really appreciate how this is like a 3-year plan or 3 to 5 year plan. It's so easy to say, we're going to be 100% blah, 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 blah by 2050. And yay, we feel good about ourselves. And then, or maybe even we put in the plan, here's 1001 things that we could do. And it's kind of overwhelming, and it's hard to track if we're actually making any progress. So I would support that where you're going already, this 3 to 5 year thinking. And I think in terms of like, how do you measure a successful plan? Like, I think maybe it was Sarah who was talking about really tracking where we're at right now, and understanding what will our region look like, or what will the council's greenhouse gas emissions be like if we did absolutely nothing? Like Excel is cleaning up the grid pretty dramatically. So already our greenhouse gas emissions will be lower if we did nothing, because Excel has a cleaner grid in the next 3 to 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So how do we move beyond business as usual?
Well, both Deb and Judy had your hands up at the same time. So, Deb, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'll be very quick. It's kind of been covered in some of the other topics, but I think to me it has to be both internally and externally focused. So it definitely, what do we and our staff and our facilities, and how do they operate, and how can we just in our day-to-day activities, but then also as we're doing long-range planning and we're looking at building big projects, that all of it's factored in both levels. And I think that then ultimately, what I know has been very helpful, even when we've had some climate or solar questions where there's been resources available to bring out to our local communities. I think that sort of that engagement that connects, because that will tie back long term both to, to comprehensive planning and some of those things, because a lot of communities want to do things, but sometimes they just need the right resources and people around to ask questions. So I think that should be part of it too.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy, then Linnea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say a couple of things kind of, when I worked at Greater MSP, we're always trying to have a robust economy. It's really important that we have a just economy. So the regional economic framework that we've put together with Greater MSP and CEI, and of course the entire region, it's everybody's framework, right? Just how this can, all I'm saying is hopefully this is intersecting in a big way in that work. And, you know, I would like to make sure that as part of our tracking, and maybe this was touched on, I had a couple of texts coming and going as I was working here, but just making sure that as we try to end racism and close gaps and disparities, that whatever this work does to help do that, it'd be great to be tracking that as well, because we know that there are areas and populations that are more negatively impacted by poor environmental conditions that they're living in, and it's not a surprise. I mean, you know, poor neighborhoods don't have better outcomes because of it. So if this work, you know, sustainability and better environmental practices, and for all the reasons for everybody, but still focus in on how we can bring up neighborhood and people and community that have suffered some of the largest gaps as well.
Air and water, right. Linnea?
To the question about like what we can measure, I was gonna say you need to have some metrics or focus on those who are most desperately impacted by the negative impacts, and whether we're talking in our metro area, we're talking globally. And Minnesota's done some really great studies, so we really have good data around air quality and water quality really impacting different communities, which are able to be determined by race. So there's racial predictability in our community. And so thinking about those communities first, who are most impacted, and prioritizing them, getting the baseline as Council Member Lindstrom talked about, and setting goals and targets to have impacts of that. And I think about how do you tie it to, so that it's not a side hustle of the council, but it's integrated into the other core things that we're doing. How does that tie into the economic plan that Judy just talked about, for example? And I know some of the metrics in the report talks about employment and things like that. And so whether it's jobs, there's a lot of opportunity. The more it can be woven into multiple levels, the more success you will have with it. The other thing I think we could do, and maybe this gets back to engagement as well, is open sourcing the challenges we're having. So I think we'll have lots of great things and stories to tell out of our community, but we also have unique challenges that we are having a hard time coming over, and inviting people into our challenges to get more brains to bear on them is, I think, important. That type of transparency is what, frankly, our citizenry is looking for when we do encounter problems. They don't expect us to have all the solutions, but they do expect us to be transparent about what we're facing, so that they can all be a part of helping us solve them in a democratic process. And so I think thinking deeply about that, I think back to our issue around the electric buses. And I definitely got lots of really great feedback around that idea that we open source our challenges and we don't just hold them inside of us. And I think there's a number of other challenges we probably face, and that it's not just on staff alone to go about engaging others in possible solutions, but that is a key role that council members and the citizenry can do as well.
Great thoughts.
I'd like to suggest that we think about how we document the work, and in particular, how we document the learnings and the nimbleness with which we have to do the work when we have to make a U-turn and try, you know, regrouping. I think that will be really beneficial to partners who want to dig in on this kind of work as well. I think we can become a resource, and I definitely agree with the idea that there's a lot we can learn from others, particularly cities. but I also think that we can be teachers. And so to the extent that we can document those learnings and not just the results, but the processes, I think will be really helpful.
And maybe if I'm building on what you're saying, Councilmember Vento, is not just document, but actually put a spotlight on it occasionally, because it becomes an opportunity for us to tell our story in a way that can be influencing others, that, you know, our leadership can help raise the bar for some of this really important work. Peter, go ahead.
I was just going to say, being really clear as we start this journey about what our priorities are for the council, meaning are they environmental priorities? Like, is our main priority to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to have cleaner air, to have cleaner water? Are the priorities economic? Do we want the council to be saving money? Do we want to be creating jobs, clean energy jobs in the region? Is the main priority resiliency for the region, creating a more equitable region? Obviously, I think the answer is all of the above, of course, but we really being clear on that to the extent that we can.
And how they fit together. Yeah. You know, I mean, to be overly glib, in the near term, we can have actions. In the long term, we want measures because these are such long term, and maybe it is so hard for us to measure how are we as an agency bending the curve for the region over time. You know, what's our distinct role? Because we could measure something that just happens in the world, but measuring our own impact, I think that's a harder challenge.
Also, Mr. Chair, I really like the idea, just building off what other people said about spelling out those co-benefits. You know, that that we can save money and be sustainable, that we can have like a shared mobility, you know, where we are supporting more bike-friendly infrastructure or a bike share program that ties into our transit, you know, so someone pays $2 and they can rent a bike and then they can hop on one of our buses, you know, these types of things, or open space and parks that are sequestering carbon, but also providing space for exercise and great quality of life for our region, and lowering the energy burden of people that are in our housing choice voucher program, you know, all these sorts of co-benefits, spelling that out and measuring.
And environmental justice while we're sequestering carbon. Any other thoughts here? Judy?
And I'm sorry, Lisa, this is a bit off topic of your question, so I can hold it. But, and maybe this was touched on as we're kind of in our last phase of searching for consultants, but I'm just hoping there's diversity within the ranks of people or firms that are coming forward to help. Maybe and maybe not, I don't know, but you know, always when we're bringing people into our work, you know, I think there's just great benefit again to hiring, you know, firms that either have people on the team that are people of color or are owned by BIPOC communities. So just putting that one in there, and I'm sure it was already considered.
I can speak to that. The procurement has gone through the AMCOM process and has passed through that. Was a concern. We had a lot of discussion during the review of the proposals regarding the composition of the teams, how their staff expertise had an understanding of our region, and so we are very aware of that, and we're very happy with the consultant we're proposing, that the team they put forward, how it's represented. We think it'll be a very good representation of the work we want to accomplish. And I want to go back to Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, who brought in the idea of um, acknowledging the challenges. That's something we've talked about a lot in our team meetings. That we've all read a lot of sustainability or climate action plans, and you go, "Wow, that's really a good idea," but I don't know how you're going to do it. We've talked a lot about the idea of recognizing the barriers. What challenges exist to achieve this? It's hard to get people on your side if they don't know what they need to do. And I think that's really one of the values of the group that we've put together with this broad scale team across the council. We've had some really some great and hard discussions on how to get this proposal out there and how to get these folks on board and what our plan will look like. And hearing from you guys today is very, very insightful and very beneficial. And I think we're well positioned to make great progress.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I would also say, from my point of view, that you know, we want to be practical. We want to actually put points on the board. On the other hand, make no small plans because they don't stir human souls. So, like, let's be bold. So there's a little contradiction. Maybe we can embrace that plurality.
I keep telling people ambitious but achievable, you know. I think
there you go.
Which is kind of what you just said.
Well, I feel like we should all just run outside and get to work, but I know we'll have time for more input along the way. Any other? And
Sure.
Lisa, oh, go ahead, Chai.
Thanks, sure. I think any successful plan will have to look at our resiliency and any sudden shocks to our system in the short term or long term, whether those shocks might be, commercial train derailments or oil pipelines bursting and then poisoning our Mississippi headwaters or any shocks like that we might have to deal with here downstream. As a very security cautious person, I just put that out there.
Right, the risks involved. Right.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for this work and this presentation. And what I wanted to say has actually been said before, but I just wanted to kind of reinforce a couple of the things that my colleagues said. And first off, Mr. Wycheck, it's so good to hear about the unexpected enthusiasm across the organization on this work. And I hope that you're hearing the enthusiasm here amongst the council as well. And just a couple of things to lift up. And one, to Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, I love this idea of open sourcing our challenges. And that's an idea that I'm going to carry into my regular work outside of the council. But I think to demonstrate real authentic community engagement, this idea of sort of open sourcing our challenges, I think is a great approach. And just briefly to what does a successful council climate action plan look like for me in both the near term and longer term, and this has been brought up, but it's just the really clear iterated acknowledgement that climate change impacts different communities very differently. And so generally we kind of look to the resiliency part of our plan, but I think this also has to do with mitigation and adaptation as well. And so that acknowledgement is there in our plan, and we can see it and show people that. And the other, I think this goes to what Councilmember Barber brought up, but the resource question as well, and that we're not just identifying the resources that we're putting in or that we're leveraging into addressing climate change, but that is a measure as well, right? I think it's a way of gauging our success is that resource question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, any final word here?
We really appreciate all of your thoughts and input. I think when we were coming into this conversation, we were thinking, is 2 questions enough? But we also wanted to be sure that we had room for you to actually take the time to hear from each other and to, do what you did today and actually build on one another's thoughts and ideas and lift up ideas as well. So that has been really helpful, as Jeff has already said, really helps us to um, kind of affirm some of the things that we were hoping you would say were the direction, but also help us bring new ideas to the conversation that maybe we hadn't thought of before. And this is perfect for this beginning stage, and you certainly will be hearing more from us along the way as we get started on this work. So I truly appreciate all of your thoughts and input, and this certainly won't be the last time we have a conversation about this. And it sounds like, and I'm excited for the enthusiasm you all have for this project as well. Thank you.
Well, it's really exciting. And Lisa, thank you. You have a really inspired team. And Eric, Jeff, Sarah, we really appreciate your engagement and the presentation and your answering the questions. And I know what you've heard from us is we do want to be engaged. And so we want in multiple ways in the year ahead. Want to hear back. Any other thoughts for Councilmember Bento?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm kind of
Not at
mouthy
all.
tonight. I had too much caffeine today. I just want to take a moment for us on the day before Earth Day, and in the midst of a conversation as important as climate change and what we can do as an organization, and during a week when we've been so focused on the trial and kind of rejoicing in that verdict, I wanted to stop and think a little bit about Walter Mondale and what he meant to our state and our country. And I wanted to share a quote that I found. I was asked to help craft a message for a national organization that I affiliated with, and I found this fabulous quote. It's a quote of his. I'm not sure when he said it. There was no date, but it's kind of like a mission statement for all of us. It's, we have no right to poison, to eat up, to chew, to pollute this wonderful country of ours. We are required to save it and purify it and protect it. And I think if he were with us tonight in talking about saving it and purifying it and protecting it, he would take that and wrap that around social justice and equity. That was very much a part of Vice President Mondale's legacy. If you have time tonight or tomorrow or over the weekend, go to nprnews.org. They rebroadcast a January of 2012 interview that former noontime host Gary Eichten did with Walter Mondale. It was Gary Eichten's last program as he was retiring. And at the end of it, Vice President Mondale provides another wonderful message about the environment. They were down to the final minute, and he wasn't going to let the conversation at the Fitzgerald end until he got in his way more than 2 cents worth on the environment. So if you want to do something special for Earth Day and to honor the legacy of Walter Mondale, listening to that broadcast would be a great way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that to this room soon. Councilmember Johnson, did you have your hand up? No. Okay. Anybody else? Well, there's nothing better than ending the meeting with Fritz Mondale here among us. So thank you for that. And thank you everybody for your engagement on this important issue, and as we are in so many other ways. Keep it up, and happy Earth Day in advance. We'll see you really soon. I think our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.